looking at community, how that plays a role. There's a reason why Globo gyms have a high churn rate and CrossFit has a high retention rate. You know, there's gratitude. There's so many studies around gratitude. And, you know, I think that the fight or flight mechanisms that are constantly being tapped into on social media makes people, one, feel like they're, you know, constantly at odds with their neighbor, makes it harder for them to feel grateful. Everything's always a problem, because like I think a lot of people, they don't realize it. They're just like they're missing some of these core core aspects, the fundamental like of being a human.
Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We have a special guest today. My longtime friend and former co-worker, Richard Ryan from Full Mag. That's how I originally knew you many, many years ago. Full Mag.
Yeah, I didn't want to step on the intro there. I was just waiting to see what the label was for this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can either list all of them or go back to an original one or do the most recent one, but I don't know what the fuck the most recent one would even be.
No, that's great.
AI pioneer.
Yeah. Yeah, we can jump into all that.
Yeah, we will.
There's so much.
You were asking me what I plan to do when we're done with all this. I've got some ideas, you know.
Let's hear it.
Some shit hits the fan style ideas. Well, one thing I want to do is buy a very large piece of property, thousands of acres. I'm going to build a place on it, obviously. But I would like to start selectively inviting people to come live there.
So you're gonna start a cult?
No, there's no belief system behind it except for fuck the government.
The
right?
dudes have to be castrated.
Yeah. No, the only real belief system that you're required to participate in is if you don't work, you don't eat. That's it. You know. And also you gotta kind of probably hate the government, but I feel like no one moves to the middle of nowhere without that sentiment intrinsically. You know, so you know what I want to do is put people on the property who can do certain things, right? Like electricians and linemen and plumber, whatever. You just got to contribute somehow, right? And obviously we'll grow food and both from the ground and above ground, right? So that would be nice, and then we'll see if it works. I think we probably could make it work. You got to do it in the right part of the country so you can use solar energy and shit like that. Yeah. But
I love these thought exercises because you kind of get down to core belief systems and stuff like that.
I mean, it weeds a lot of people out who aren't interested in that, obviously, at the top level, but also who are like, once you start discussing the particulars, like, oh, I'm not doing all that. I'm like, all right, that's fine.
Well, you can unpack a number of things in that, right? Where you're saying that you have to contribute, and that's, I think, one of the fundamental flaws in universal basic income is it should be universal basic opportunity. As we get into this world of, again, artificial intelligence systems and robotics, and combining these things, you start asking yourself, what is the value of a human being? And it's like it's one of these really broad questions to ask, and people may roll their eyes at it and everything, but we're rapidly approaching these things. Whereas if you can have a humanoid robot, which right now doesn't look aesthetically anything like a human being, but when you start integrating language models that are essentially every lived experience from, you know, the last 20 years in our digital footprint, you're going to have the ability to have a fairly accurate relationship that would emulate the human experience with that robot.
Yeah. I mean, we anthropomorphize animals. We look into our animals' faces knowing they have no idea what we're saying. And not only do we talk to them in whatever language we choose, we project their emotions onto them and then turn it into language and repeat it back to ourselves. You know what I mean? So it's the idea that we won't be able to reach that point with a robot is fucking stupid, to be honest.
Yeah, man. I mean, I guess we're really just jumping straight into it, and you're asking about stuff that I've been working on, things I've been doing.
You're working on a general intelligence to take over the world.
Well, also a book too. I went through like 60 books on addiction over the last year or so, just really like trying to unpack the varying levels of just the different mechanisms and everything from substance, alcohol, pornography, sex, gambling. Gambling, one of the more nefarious ones, and one of the big concerns around artificial intelligence for me is that, again, a lot of these models have been trained in a way that hasn't been fully disclosed, but you would speculate that it's off of, scraping websites and social platforms and stuff like that, which in of it itself is, it's an inefficient or misaligned incentive mechanism for people, because you hear people say all the time, well, you're not the customer, you're the product. What is the attention economy? And it's, well, by its definition, the brand is Google or Facebook, and the customer is, the advertiser, the ad agencies. They're selling the ads, and they're selling your attention. Yeah. So they optimize these systems.
And you're the product, by the way. You're not the customer on social media. You are the product on social media. Just to be clear. And that's the same with television as well. Yeah. Right? And it always has been.
Your attention is the commodity that they trade. Yeah. And so the machine learning systems are meant to optimize, to manipulate you in a way that increases the watch time on video or watch time on platform. So these large language models, LLMs, whatever you want to call them, have been trained on essentially 20 years of human manipulation that's been optimized to increase watch time on platform. Now, the kind of nefarious thing about this that a lot of people aren't necessarily talking about right now, and how it plays in with addiction and everything, is like, you look at the parasocial relationships and how they've changed the world of pornography from, what was magazines to just tube videos and everything, to these parasocial relationships on OnlyFans and everything like that. Now, the crazy thing that we're rapidly approaching with the more optimized for addiction, and why gambling such a more, again, nefarious problem than these other addictions, is the intermittency and the potential for the next reward to be the one that changes everything. So you're not going to get it every single time, but there's a statistical probability or something. That variability is what makes it more addictive. Whereas if you were to constantly hit that dopamine button all the time, it would just lower your threshold, and it wouldn't be as consuming as say gambling. So the scary thing with artificial intelligence systems, if it understands and learns the variability component to, say, the relationships, you could have a humanoid robot that essentially isn't going to do everything that you say all the time. It may actually have a personality, and these things will ultimately make it more addictive. Then you could take the robot outside of just maybe the intimate relationships, but you start talking about your property. You have your Apple Vision Pro or whatever the training hardware is. You go around, you start putting up fence posts, and you do your thing, and then you're essentially training 10 robots. Maybe it's just you living out there by yourself. Maybe it's not really a bunch of people. I mean, you could end up, ex machina in it, and having...
Yeah, dude. And just, give them all, suppressed rifles.
Yeah.
And maybe a claymore, or just turn them into bombs themselves. Who knows?
Yeah.
But yeah, the gambling part is particularly interesting to me, because it is among the things that have sprung up organically to capitalize on the reward system that nature created for us to make us go find food, mate, build civilization, all this shit, right? Gambling is the first one, really, other than, I guess, maybe prostitution, but gambling really is the first leisure activity to ever be created. Like all these stupid games on your phone and the internet and social media in general, it all kind of started with gambling. So if you're trying to look into this issue, that's probably the best place to start, because we've got the most data on it, right?
Yeah.
It basically, though, like you use the phrase continually pushing that dopamine button.
Yeah.
Like these things, they all exist for a reason, right? In the same way that, I don't know, that certain types like whey protein and meat protein burn more quickly,
casein.
right? Yeah, and then casein burns more slowly, right? Yeah. Like there's a reason for that, to have it all in your diet, right? Because you want to, if you're thermogenic overnight, you're not fucking storing extra calories and fat and shit like that. And then the slow burn during the day helps you do physical activities, blah, 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 right? These parallels or dichotomies exist all throughout human life, all throughout all life. But when you program around them, instead of the dopamine hit coming to, let's say I'm a generally content person because my serotonin regulation is good, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm doing the right things. But even the most content person needs a little boost during the day. It is when you think about like whatever it is that motivates you, your kids or a sports team or your work or helping people, doing charity or whatever it is, that swell of emotion you feel is a catalyst. That's like putting nitrous, like pressing the nitrous button on your car, right? It gives you a little bit extra go. Now you're constantly relying on that. And when you not only does it lose effectiveness over time, but you lose the intrinsic benefit of it as well.
Yeah.
Which means you are stuck in a rut, which is a good, aside from the hormone levels that everybody has these days, it's probably the second largest cause of the rapid wave and rise in depression amongst groups that used to be pretty resilient from that shit. Young girls, right? Especially. So forget about 13 Reasons Why. That's an aberration. The more statistically likely thing is a young male killing themselves, not a female, right? Mm-hmm. The fastest growing contingent of suicide and suicide attempts is now young females, teenage girls, for the first time in all of human history, so far as we can tell. And probably because they are more captured by that than we are. It's, for you and I, it might be an addiction thing, but for them, it's an addiction and an image thing, right?
Yeah.
So now the way you see yourself has gone away. So you've lost the chemicals that regulate your body correctly, and now also you've lost your purpose. It's like not having GPS and the tires falling off your car, and people are fucked up because of it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that have gone very thoroughly into some hypothesis as to why, and specifically around the younger female and how detrimental the social, well, as Jonathan Haidt would say, the anxious generation, and specifically like around those developmental years and the highlight reel comparison of other people's lives and everything sets unrealistic expectations for and lays the groundwork for body dysmorphia around both women and men. You'll see that a lot now, which is kind of, I mean, early days, I remember you get like Muscle and Fitness magazines and stuff like that, and like Blade would come out and you'd have Ryan Reynolds just jacked, and they say, "Oh, he ate broccoli and chicken." Yeah, okay. And a lot of horse steroids and stuff like that. Now it's like everything is unrealistic. You can even add the outside of face tuning images and photoshopping and everything, but just people and you're not seeing the mundane on social media, because again, that incentive mechanism, it's about really eyes on. It's concerning. For me, that's one of the reasons why I felt compelled to start writing a book, just anecdotally from my journey and trying to figure out the things that kind of work for essentially a recovery process, separating, defining, I guess you could say, rules and boundaries on my consumption and everything, where I've always resisted social media in so many different ways, because I feel like I'm a fairly complicated person. Like, I like firearms, I like explosives, but, I like comedy, I like software development, artificial intelligence, like all these different things. And it's really hard to put me in a box. And I never wanted to be the gun guy on YouTube. I never wanted to be a guy that was put in a box and this label put on them. But unfortunately, the way you play the game, you have to optimize for stuff like that. And so for me, I felt like it was almost a lie too, to constantly put up like the highlight reel of me jumping out of airplanes and doing all these really sensational things. It's like, no, that's maybe one day a month, and then the rest of the time sitting in front of a computer editing or making phone calls or dealing with insurance and, you know, logistics and stuff like that. And in some ways that contributes to, you know, other people's depression, right? They're like, well, fuck, man, my 9 to 5 sucks or whatever. I should be doing that. Like, and there's something to be said for the 9 to 5 too, like in admiring the ability to clock out and then just be off work and everything. So
yeah, that's why I'm against homework in principle.
Yeah.
The idea of homework, my buddy Gerard Michaels talks about this a lot actually, but the idea of homework in school teaches children that their time, even at home, doesn't belong to them, that it still belongs to the man. I think that should be our entire education system needs to be wiped out. Yeah. It's not an education system, it's a programming factory. But to your point, so we are, and maybe this might be true of all species once they reach a certain level of cognition, because you go from just trying to stay alive or whatever and reproduce at the base level, and as you get smarter, more communicable, or rather more communicative, then things start to get pretty complicated, right?
Sure.
But we are, socially speaking, we're a really good example of affinity-based marketing, right? Like we look around and see things, like the way the human brain works, oftentimes we'll see two things that we like that intersect, and we will be naturally drawn towards that thing. Beer and football, whatever, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's a million different examples of this. And that's a good mechanism to have, right? Because it maintains, to a large degree, it maintains social order more than actual laws do. Because people don't want to break that social system that gives them comfort. Until you reach a certain point, third generation or so, where people are like, I deserve this or whatever. But,
hard times.
Yeah. But it's a good backdrop for a civilized society to have, whether it's apes in the jungle or us walking around over here. But if all the input we see, instead of just face-to-face with other people or whatever, however else we used to view all this stuff, you know what I mean? Like, keeping up with the Joneses isn't new. There's been competition, and there should be always, right? It's a good thing for people. But we've replaced the input now into that engine where all we see is things that are elevated as close to perfection as possible, right? And getting more perfect as time goes on.
Or completely false.
With filters, well, that's the thing, right? So at some point, you've only got two options. One is abandon that system entirely, right? And the other is to be completely absorbed by it. But if you do number two, if you do the second option, then you have to deny that the real world exists then. I think South Park did a really good episode on this. I don't know if you remember that, but the ugliest girl in school fucking photoshopped a picture of herself. And then the little boys will run around like, look who I'm dating. And the girl's standing next to him. And she doesn't look anything like the picture, but she's right there. Yeah. Right. So as long as you had a nice Photoshop picture, you could get a mate at that point. This is fourth graders, obviously. So take that for what it's worth. But that would be the level of cognitive dissonance required. At some point, there will be a diminishing return on all this falsity that we put on the internet and projected onto ourselves as well, right? At some point, the mind will break. It will break, it'll bifurcate, or something will happen, because we're not built for that. We're not built for cognitive dissonance.
Well, I think you're touching on a number of things, and these like thought exercises, like the things that concern me more than anything, like you really have to distill it down. And again, I know a lot of people like you're distilling it down way too simple, but you have to, because the iteration and the change that's happening is happening so fast that democracy is not going to be able to keep up. Even hardware in some capacity is not going to be able to keep up. And so you look at just the very start of the conversation was kind of the nail on the head when you're talking about communication. And so what we're seeing is an unprecedented in the scale and improvement of communication. So if you were to take, the verbal, language to the Rosetta Stone, the Bible, all of these things over thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, to the printing press. And then once you hit the printing press, you're again orders of magnitude in the ability to communicate at scale. And then you get to the point of the telephone. and the internet. And now we're rapidly approaching another order of magnitude, and you have Neuralink. And all these points in time in human history, there were multiple civilizations. There was never really a species level risk of extinction outside of or let me rephrase that: species level extinction risk of from self-infliction.
Internal, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Because there was redundancies in societies
like
around
standoff.
the world.
We were decentralized more.
Yeah.
So, right,
So now we have if COVID shows us anything, we have a global society in so many different ways that relies on supply chain and all these other different things. And I think it's admirable that somebody like Elon would say, hey, we need to be a multiplanetary species, which is great. But when you start talking about exploring the universe, our biological makeup isn't necessarily the most efficient way to travel the universe. We need food, water, and there's constraints around speed and velocity and all these other different things. Whereas if we become a digital species in some way, shape, or form, uploading our consciousness or whatever that looks like, that becomes way more efficient, right? You're able to send drones out and transfer that at relatively the speed of light. But the other risk with that, though, is when you start integrating, you look at the cell phone, perfect example, and the addiction component to it with the the attention economy and everything else. People have this anxiety when they leave their phone behind and all this other stuff. It's a very inefficient thing. You never jonesed for your home phone while you're out. I got to get home. No, my answering machine's going to be on. But now there's a separation anxiety that happens because there's this really, really inefficient manipulative thing that's always around us. Yeah. Now, once it starts getting integrated into the brain, you have to start looking at the competitive advantage for those who have and those who don't. So if it increases memory, if it increases compute, even the ability to access information, the friction points in history where, like maybe you went to a library, you had to drive there, you had to use the Dewey Decimal System, you had to find the books and hope that it was there, that you could read it. And, you had a question you were wanting an answer to, there was a lot of effort required in getting it. Now it's just right there. So the competitive advantage to having this integrated into your brain is going to be substantial. So for those who have it, it could be that we really get into the Jetsons meet the Flintstones moment where you talk about the bifurcation component. Like there's a lot of things that are kind of flags that are being raised in that situation, because then you become a species at risk of a single point of failure from software, hardware, all these different, like if the batteries just go bad and fry everybody's brains.
Solar flare.
Whatever,
right? I mean, like if a solar flare, if a real one, the one that they're always worried about, happened on North America, 3 million people would be dead in the first month, and about 180 million people in the first year if we didn't repair everything really rapidly, right?
Yeah.
It's a problem. That's not a single point of failure. Like as far as a foreign country attacking us and doing that, there's 9 separate substations, and 4 of them they would have to hit in person, so it's unlikely that that'll ever happen. Yeah. That to me is not something we should worry about.
You're talking about coronal
mass ejection.
Yeah. Okay.
No, that we should be concerned about to some degree, right? Like, just looked at like Tesla stuff is going to be released soon. Start putting shit underground and shield it, and we'll probably be a little bit more resilient from that. But yeah, I mean, it is. I guess the phrase is "don't put all your eggs in one basket."
Sure.
Right? That's Carl Sagan's been talking about this since the 70s. I'm glad that Elon's kind of picking it up, because that's one of the silos that we need to be operating in. The other silos are, obviously, we got to live here for a little bit longer, so we got to figure that shit out too.
Yeah. So again, for me, we have the humanoid robotics thing. We have the artificial intelligence systems, from diffusion models to language models and everything else, and then the integration of the technology. There's a lot coming at us really fast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people get caught up in the distractions of talking point politics and stuff like that. It's like that's how you get somebody, right,
That's how you're basically just jingling keys in front of them,
Yeah.
right? Get them lost in the minutia, and this is what has been done with the abortion debate for the last 50 years.
Well, yeah, I mean
that could have been solved immediately just by following the goddamn Constitution and sending it back to the states.
Yeah,
that could have happened in the 70s, and it would have been over by now. All the states would have voted the way they voted. It would be done. But solved problems don't get out the vote, do they? Right?
No, and the Obama administration could have codified Roe.
In 2011 when they did fucking ACA, yeah.
But they
had a supermajority,
right? But they knew that would be the thing that would be like a nail in the coffin for funding.
Yeah, yeah, and then this thing we think of addiction as people who. Gambling is one. I think gambling is actually second tier. Typically, drugs and alcohol are what we associate with addiction. The far more common version of addiction is food, right?
Yeah.
38% of Americans are now either diabetic or pre-diabetic. Over 60% are overweight. And it's because people eat sugar, right?
Yeah.
It's really that simple. They eat processed foods and sugar. Knock that shit off and you'll be fine. Really, but
I love because I always go back to National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. It's non-nutritive cereal varnish that enhances the crunch and
cereal
everything.
Varnish, yeah.
I love it because it's so true. I mean, there's the whole food experience in and of itself. The sugar, the crunch. There's so many systems that are just being hijacked in that.
What's crunchy is fresh food.
Yeah. Yeah, broccoli. It's just raw broccoli.
Yeah, but it's like that addiction. The reason that I think it's important to look at it at its base level, like you said, reduce it down as far as possible, is so you can see it in all the places that it's happening and not just the ones that are the most obvious. Because, and this is true of almost any social or physical situation that happens, we tend to focus only on the very small minority worst case scenario and then ignore the most ubiquitous. We always do that. So for climate change, that's the best description of our approach to man-made climate change, if you even believe in that shit, is that, and Alex Epstein talks about this shit all the time. I don't know if you know. Do you know him?
I don't.
Fossil Futures. I'll give you his book.
That'd be
epic. It's really good. Even climate scientists say that this worst case scenario where the fucking sea levels rise and everything's fucked up is like maybe a 1% chance of that happening. The most likely scenario is just what we're seeing now, right? We get a little bit warmer, and as a result, in the same way that we always do when we come out of an ice age, there's a quick freeze and then a fucking quick melting like happened 12,000 years ago, and then it gradually increases a little bit over time. Sometimes it goes down in certain periods, but it goes back up, and then it'll freeze again at some point, right?
Yeah.
And we just... You can try to interdict it. I don't think it's smart to try to fuck with nature. I think it's a lot.
I mean,
it's a lot
historically,
more.
look at every single time we've thought we could be smarter than nature.
It just doesn't work. So the best thing to do is just to plan for it, right? Here are the predictions. This is the most likely course. The 60% option is this. This is probably what's going to happen. So let's put a lot of our eggs in this basket, but let's also plan for a rainy day, right?
Yeah.
We do this with everything. We look at the 100,000 or so people dying of fentanyl overdoses a year. And it's like, oh, that's the face of addiction. No, the face of addiction is the 40% of our country that's diabetic. That's the face, right? 40% of 330 million people. That's quite a few more than 100,000. And the number one causes of death are still heart disease and cancer, right? Yeah. And what do we know? Even the research recently on cancer, the more red meat and beef tallow you eat, the safer you're going to be, right? It's like, oh, where was that research in the 50s?
Yeah.
It's...
I mean, there's an addictive component to so many aspects of society right now, which is maybe I'm drawing conclusions, but I'm really trying to unpack the different recovery steps. And again, there's a stigma associated with the term addiction, but like even looking, like our peer group and people that we know, specifically around the transitioning from military service into civilian life and everything, you're just smoking your adrenal system.
Oh, yeah.
But you have that combined with a very intimate kind of connection with meaningful relationships. And people, you people say it all the time that, it's hard finding relationships that are as meaningful as that when they were in.
Sure, yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons for that. And so, like, like looking at community, how that plays a role. There's a reason why Globo gyms have a high churn rate and CrossFit has a high retention rate. There's gratitude. There's so many studies around gratitude. And I think that the fight or flight mechanisms that are constantly being tapped into on social media makes people, one, feel like they're, constantly at odds with their neighbor, makes it harder for them to feel grateful. Everything's always a problem. It's the end of the world and all these other different things. So, really trying to unpack all these different steps in the different recovery processes, and not really in a way that makes it seem like it's it has that stigma associated with it, because like I think a lot of people, they don't realize it. They're just like, they're missing some of these core core aspects, the fundamental of being a human.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like someone might say, just to play devil's avocado, that, well, we're different now, blah, blah, blah. Well, we're not. Evolution is a very long and slow process. We are not done with all this. So all these biological triggers we have that have been built over the last 250,000 or so years aren't going to disappear in 10 years of the internet, bud. I'm sorry. It's just not how it works, right? And there's something called Dunbar's number, right?
Yeah, 200 people.
Somewhere between 150 and 200. That's the most amount of people that a human being can really conceptualize, right? And there's research on super smart dogs, and it's about the same, actually.
Really?
Right? Like an object permanence test for a border collie, one of the smarter dogs.
I saw that.
They can remember about 150 to 200 objects, right? This isn't a golden ratio, because it's going to vary depending on the mammalian brain and everything. But ordinary people on social media, like just people that have fucking normal 9-to-5 job, nurse, fucking whatever, have thousands of people following them, and then they follow thousands of people. And that is like drinking through a social fire hose. Yeah. You don't actually ever taste anything. You're constantly overwhelmed with everything. And we wonder why we have adrenal fatigue, why our amygdala is all fucked up. People are in a constant state of fight or flight. And I think as much as just social dynamics from women being in the workplace and third wave feminism, and then hormone levels.
You're going to make an argument against the 19th Amendment.
No. And then hormone imbalances in both men and women have deeply affected the relationship between men and women, the value structure. And I don't mean their I don't mean their ethics. I mean the value that each one of them represents and brings into the relationship. Yeah. Now you have no real sense of that stuff, right? You're inundated. It's analysis or paralysis by analysis to some degree, right?
Yeah.
And people just make really bad choices. I don't know how you get out of that.
Yeah.
Right?
And
like you've almost got to fucking just make a commitment to put the phone away forever, right?
Yeah. So for me, and again, this is very anecdotal, and I was trying to lean on some of the different, be it AA and all these other different recovery systems, and trying to figure out what that looks like for me personally and what works in the kind of digital. I mean, I guess we can revisit this once I completely finish. I am done with the book, but still going through some experiments and everything. But for me, insight was the very first thing, and really trying to unpack things, because you really don't realize what your usage is unless you're tracking it. So like across all devices, not just your phone. Your phone's definitely the most important, because it's the one with you all the time, and you have that subconscious tendency to grab it and open it. Like some of the really cool, interesting, scary statistics were the points at which I would close an application only to immediately reopen it. That compulsive addictive behavior was like, oh shit, this is something, something I need to figure out.
Right.
Outside of the insight stuff, journaling, really defining what my core values are. And I don't want to say I look down on journaling. I just I didn't give it as much value as I have recently. because going through different thought exercises like writing letters to yourself in the future or to a younger version of yourself, about thinking about the things you are worried about and trying to give advice to, and then you're able to start kind of figuring out what's important to you, and then you extrapolate the amount of time that's being wasted on these different platforms or whatever. It's like, am I really using this for work or am I consuming? Because if you're distributing content, that's one thing. You could kind of have to be on the platforms. But if you find yourself where the pendulum's swinging too much in the consumption side, then you have to start weighing and quantifying this in a way. It's like, okay, if I'm spending 10 plus hours a day on my phone, and half of that's probably not necessarily productive or towards the things I deem valuable, you look at that in the course of 60 years, it's like, oh shit, that's weeks, that's months of time in life. And like maybe it's not that I want to learn to play the piano, maybe it's I want to spend time. And this is actually Neil deGrasse Tyson has said this thing that just really resonated with me, which is kind of dumb, but it struck a nerve with me, was that you really need perspective on certain statistics. And most people know that like a dog's life is 1 year of your life is equivalent of 7 years of your dog's life. But then what he said, he was like, if you take and you look at it in a different way, 1 day of your life is a week of your dog's. It hit me so hard. I was like, oh shit, like times that I'm gone for a week away from home or whatever, I've missed
2 months
of my dog's life playing fetch with them or whatever. And when you start looking at things that are really important to people, like time with their parents, time with their kids and stuff like that, then you're able to really clearly start drawing these kind of things that this is the red line in the sand and fuck this thing. Like when it starts encroaching on those things that I find valuable, like having a positive impact on my community or spending time with my friends or family or whatever, it's like, you know what? And then, you start figuring out ways, okay, do I get, you familiar with the brick RFID thing? Okay. You have that, you have MindSight, the lock boxes. Dude, if you say, hey, it's date night, I'm going to put my phone in the MindSight for 4 hours. If you find yourself breaking into a device to get access to your phone, you probably do have a problem. You might want to seek professional help.
But I would recommend trying to figure it out before then. And this is a good way to do it. Just create a bolo, right? Be on the lookout in your head. The next time you catch yourself doom scrolling for no reason, just put it down. Right? Just force yourself to do it, right? Because this is habit building. It requires effort on your part. Now, again, this is just a feature of I guess, a more calm and safe society, but we don't have to do much of that anymore. Things are kind of just readily available. Like we think that we work hard, and we do. Going to work for 8-10 hours a day for 5 or 6 days a week, that's difficult work. No question about that. It's not fighting every second of your life to stay alive, however, right? And it's quite a bit different. So it takes time to really learn things. It takes time to really know things. Forget about learning a skill, but to actually understand something. I mean, I always enjoyed Einstein saying, if you can't explain this in the simplest of terms, you don't understand it well enough. You need to go back and learn more about it.
That's great.
You need to learn. You need time to really appreciate things, like you were talking about. Imagine yourself in the time period, or imagine yourself experiencing time the same way that another person might. Like a child probably thinks a lot like a dog. Those moments, especially from ages like 2 to 7, really matter for them. Jordan Peterson talks about that shit a lot, just from a developmental position. We used to think that it took about 21 days to build a habit. The reality is it's about 10 weeks, right, of consistent effort, right? And it programs your brain to behave a certain way. Now, 10 weeks of doing something every single day sounds like a lot of stuff, but it's 10 weeks. It's 2.5 months. It's not very, out of your entire life, it's not that much. Now, how do we even know this shit's true? You and I know it's true because we do marketing. We know that for a lukewarm person, 3 to 5 impressions will result in some kind of conversion. For a new customer entirely, it's somewhere between 7 and 35, depending on whatever, right? There's a lot of different factors there. That means you think about this, think about yourself as the consumer and all of life as a product that you're engaging with. You have to hit something somewhere between 7 and 35 times before you even commit to it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that you have to reorganize your brain to think about life that way. Instead of like, oh, I'm going to go do this weekend and that this weekend. Why don't you do the same thing for a little while?
Yeah.
Do it for a little while and see, like, if you really enjoy that or if you're just occupying your time somehow. And I think it's a good test because you'll put this shit down when you do it, right?
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much there, right? So you're talking about, well, one, this gets cited all the time, but the Stanford marshmallow study and delayed gratification. One of the things I found is like, again, the phone and whatever's coming next is going to be a substantial competitive advantage, right? I'm not saying that I'm not going to use my phone, but I need to have clear boundaries in how I'm going to do it. I think, Tim Ferriss and a lot of other guys will, say that they've just completely removed all social aspects from their phone. And I get that. I totally understand that. You don't even want to have that there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a lot of people in business and human performance are doing that now because it's the same thing I do in other parts of my life. I don't want to eat shitty food, so I don't fucking buy it. If
it's in the cupboard, you're gonna probably eat it.
Exactly. Yeah. If I'm high as shit at fucking midnight, getting ready to go to sleep or something, and there's shit in there, I'm gonna go eat it.
Yeah,
for sure. So instead, I have apples and grapes and avocado and shit like that, right? Or cooked meat. I've got something that's good for me.
I think everybody's
those are the left and right limits.
Is completely different, right?
Yeah.
Like people are gonna have varying levels of self-control. And you're going to know yourself way better. And that's why I think I have to say that my experience is anecdotal.
Yeah.
But the goal is to provide as many tools in this process that I'm trying to maybe throw out there and just give an opportunity for the community to contribute to it as well.
Yeah. And I think it's good. It's a good thing to give people, I guess, a halo of information that is modular so they can. Correct. Because, I mean, look, it's all very bespoke to the individual.
Yeah, you know what I mean? and like I say, most of the chapters, pillars, or whatever you want to call them, are very broad and then very specific to me underneath, and then examples that example would be the community component, right? It was like, is that your church? Is that CrossFit? Is it a shooting group? What is it, right? But is it a group text? Right, I think that's a problem. You gotta group texts are good, but
but you need to meet those people in person.
Correct.
Right. We create, like, people say go outside and touch grass, and it seems like a meme at this point, but it literally changes your body chemistry when you do that, and it changes your body chemistry when you look at somebody in the eyes and talk to them, especially someone that you care about.
No, so that's exactly my point, right? Because people will argue that online gaming, and I'm not saying that there is. Ethically it's good or bad. I'm just saying that because the amount of time that predominantly younger male demographic spends interacting verbally with other males, but doesn't get the social cues of, like, you don't have the consequences of saying something stupid and getting punched in the shoulder or whatever.
Yeah.
You don't have the nuances and watching somebody's facial expressions and how what you're saying is impacting them. Yeah. Right? There's so many different things that are atrophying because of the hybrid digitalized processes.
Yeah.
And
I don't think people are more autistic today than they were 25 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, physically speaking, I think socially we are, because we programmed ourselves that way. Yeah. My conversation with you is like this.
Yeah.
So how you doing, Richard? Blah, blah, blah. And I don't even just mean typing. I mean, I'm not making eye contact. I'm not looking at your body language. I have no idea what sadness or anger looks like.
Yeah.
And that's a fucking problem. You know what I mean?
For sure.
95+% of communication is nonverbal in human beings. That's even more so in some of the lower mammals, right?
Yeah.
But they communicate, I think it's like 2% in grunts and different sounds and stuff, but it's almost all nonverbal. For us, even us, where we can fucking talk to the moon right now, if we were the ISS, I could use this to talk to the ISS if I wanted to. We still 95% or higher, right?
Yeah.
When you lose that skill, I mean, it could be a step in evolution, not a good one. Not all evolution is good, right? Like sometimes we fucking put our finger on the scale a little bit and things do not go well. For example, the fucking food pyramid, right?
Yeah.
It's not good, but you gotta like, are you familiar with the oxytocin hug? Do you know what that is?
I'm familiar with the process. I mean, oxytocin, serotonin, and I mean the dopaminergic system are like key components to like most of these.
So the research is, on average, a 22-second hug will make somebody have an oxytocin dump.
Really?
Right? Yes.
Huh.
And I've seen it. I've seen it happen. I won't mention names because the dude is super fucking powerful, but walks into a room with a bunch of fucking operator types. There's a couple of support people. One of them's a female. Hugs her for 22 straight seconds, and she just starts bawling.
Really?
And the dude says, see, she needed that shit.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like that's a real thing.
I feel bad because I hug people for a long time, not for that, but just because
just to touch tips.
No, it's so for me. I don't know if the elderly people like growing up would tell you how important a handshake is because it tells you more about the person. And so handshakes were always important to me, and just figuring out that character. But then hugs came around, and it's like you can read so many like behavioral like cues hugging someone.
Yeah.
Whether they're really uncomfortable, like the pat when they're trying to cut the hug off, to like different people and how they embrace, and there's so many different aspects of it. And I'm like, now that makes me feel manipulative, like hugging people for so long.
No. It's good. It's never a bad time to have an oxytocin dump.
Yeah.
Well, maybe in a gunfight that wouldn't work out for you, but generally speaking, it's a very healthy process. That people don't really feel it very frequently. I think maybe the first time you like hold a child, or it's probably more common between people and animals than it is now between people and other people. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
And that's
So is it the same? Have they done research on that?
Yeah.
Interesting.
It's the same for the person. I don't know about for the animal. Obviously, the animal, they're always happy. If you're hugging the animal, they're always happy, right?
Interesting.
But yeah, it's like this is what it shows you. Forget about any of the woo stuff or even social stuff. At a physical level, we require that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a mechanism that's persisted all this time.
For sure.
We need it. So how do we find a way to exercise that need? This is the case for all the biological needs we have, right? This should be one of the focuses, not just for addiction recovery or whatever, but and not just for human performance, but just for being a fucking human being.
That's exactly
right?
it. That's
like,
exactly it.
How do I not leverage? Or satisfy or anything like that, but how do I fucking move these gears around the way they're intended to be in the world that we live in now? That should be like the holy grail for every new generation.
Yeah. So you like, this may be stupid, but like when you talk about the different gears and stuff, it's like the human experience and what's required are all these different gears and how they're interlocking to make this one machine run, right? Yeah, and again, you have the community component, be it touch and gratitude and
diets. It's like everything,
all fitness,
right?
And all these different things. But then you have the exchange of value, and that's people extracting or providing value, and that's where money comes in, and all these other different things. And so some gears might become bigger and cause these other ones to turn less or more, right? Yeah. And that's where you get like the attention economy and things where they're extracting more value than they're actually providing. It's actually coming at a net negative. But I think that, as technology is iterating at an unprecedented pace, that we need to really start looking at these core human level experiences and say, look, UBI and shit like that, that's great that some people want people to have.
The impulse to take care of people is important.
It is, yeah.
But that's not like, you don't just do it at all costs, right?
Correct.
It still has to make sense.
Right.
And I don't mean economically, because UBI could make sense economically. There's a way to do that would make sense. I mean, we could go back to feudalism and it would technically work, right?
I think opportunity. I think universal basic opportunity, and like really drawing what is value, what is the value of a human life? Like, is it conversation? Is it embracing people? Is it like the work that they do? And then what happens when you have a robot that can do that? And not just the work, but like, again, using language models and, be it, skins on it. And, say you could build a human being for $50,000, then what is your life worth?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've got to look back at this through history. Now, we've never had sentient androids before, obviously, but we have had the value system of ordinary people and the value of their life and labor challenged in history before.
Yeah.
3rd and 4th century Rome is a good example of this.
How so?
So for a time, slavery was outlawed in Rome, not for any moral reasons, but because the fucking free folk and the plebs who were Roman citizens couldn't find work anymore.
Yeah.
And it was fucking up the economy. So they were like, all right, cool, no more slavery, right? This is a direct correlation to that. Like if we creative destruction will happen, right? But if you're off, if the creative destruction is displacing people without creating a new industry, if it's just the labor that's being replicated, now you've got a fucking problem.
Yeah.
Right? And it is a problem unless you are content just to give to trust that governments, that the state or that large corporation is going to give most of their proceeds away to. And that ain't happening, right? Then it's a big problem, right? So we've faced this before, we know it, but I don't think that banning AI, AGI, or robots is obviously that's stupid, right?
Yeah,
but,
I think
there's gonna be something. We've got to figure it out, and it's best if we figure it out now.
Yeah, we're sprinting towards a cliff right now and about to jump off, and we don't know if it's we're going 5 foot down into a pool or 1,000 foot off into a rock cliff.
Yeah. People are way more concerned about fucking AGI, like a general intelligence, like Skynet or something, than they are about the actual, again, they're catastrophizing and not thinking about the broader fucking effects of what will really happen in a real world, right?
Yeah.
Which is mostly not just the displacement of workers, but the devaluation of their fucking labor and thus the value of their life, right?
Exactly.
And that's the much bigger problem. And you say we're charging towards the cliff right now. I mean, we've been charging towards it since Reagan, frankly, with deregulation.
Yeah.
I don't want the federal government to even exist, to be honest, but they do exist. And it isn't that they just deregulated, it's that they picked sides, right? That's the fucking problem. So Reagan changed the way that antitrust was adjudicated entirely, twice during his administration. And we started to see the monopolization and oligopolization of America begin in the 80s. Clinton reinforced this by allowing the military-industrial complex to participate, and we went from 80% of military sales going to 100 vendors down to 5.
Yeah.
Between Clinton and Obama in 2014.
Yeah.
Right. Bush allowed Whirlpool to acquire Maytag. Then they had a 75% market share of all home appliances. 75 fucking percent. We went from 6 phone companies to 4. We went from 20 airlines to 4, right? All in the course of about 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
We went from prosecuting 15.7 and major antitrust suits every single year down to 3, including 0 in 2014, the year that Obama allowed Google to vertically integrate and buy DoubleClick, right, which is a huge fucking mistake. And it's led us...
Ask any tech guys these days, and they're like, Khan's just like not letting anything happen. Which, so, I mean, like, yeah. I mean,
it's a big problem. And, you know, for every law Congress passes, unelected bureaucrats pass 16 new regulations. It's a 1 to 16 ratio for unelected assholes, right? So it isn't just that this new tech is coming. It is that we've built a system where it will be whatever advantage, if we stay in the current system we're in, whatever advantage we would have gotten from AGI, AI, robots, whatever, will be monopolized by
for sure
the top 0.1%, 0.01% actually. And we're going to have, forget about like wage inflation or income inequality, we're going to have a persistent depression, right? I mean, it's going to be a really large problem that might be, it might collapse like we'll always come back. It's not it's not the end of the world. I'll say that, but it would cause so much unnecessary bullshit that we could fix now if we really wanted to, but Congress isn't going to do it.
Yeah, there are things that give me hope though too. You have the open source movement, which hopefully I'm contributing to, is like, that is, Mark Zuckerberg and his redemption arc right now. Most people look to him as like the evil robot meta overlord.
No, he was just a child.
And now
like he was a literal child in charge of 2 billion people, essentially, in a lot of ways.
And now he's, the jiu-jitsu wake surfer, like doing open source,
hanging out with Gordon
llama,
Ryan and shit.
LLM. So, I mean, he's got a open source AI model. There's, some of the, the fusion models, arguably one of the, most popular ones right now is probably going to be Flux, another open model. So it's going to be really expensive. And this was my thesis like a few years ago, and why I wanted to build products to in the open source world is I can incentivize a developer who isn't necessarily employed by me. Like I can have every developer in the world competing for a feature, whereas like Facebook or Google, they're going to have to hire every single engineer in the world, and that's just not economically viable or possible, really. And so I think open source is the way. The kind of dystopian scenario of it being one centralized, monopolized either system or company controlling all that is just terrifying.
Yeah.
Because again, it's such like I hate beating this dead horse, but like when you hear orders of magnitude in whatever that is, like speed, efficiency, accuracy, variability, like there's so many different things, like AlphaFold and being able to come up with new elements that people didn't even have on their radar. It's terrifyingly exciting. And I think that we have to have these conversations. I think they're super important, again, to distill down as much as possible, because again, me anecdotally in this process trying to figure out my core values and everything, I think a lot of people are just wrapped up in talking points. It's like the abortion debate in conjunction with AI and Taylor Swift nudes and stuff, and I was like, no, hold up, like you're talking about completely throttling a technology because you saw something on Twitter that that like wasn't cool. Yeah. It's like, I mean,
imagine if we applied that to energy and we didn't have nuclear reactors all over the world. We would be living in a much shittier world than we do today.
It's right? Just, I think people need to temper their expectations and the things that make them angry, like, and really like, because if you were to take current day 2024 Photoshop into 1996, and you had a graphic designer that was able to do things, that person would probably go to jail.
Yeah.
But they like today they could just take it and upload it to Twitter, and people will be like, fake, whatever. And that's how quick some of these things. I'll put it out there. Like for the last year and a half, I have over 100 social media accounts that are all artificial intelligence, and so I haven't crossed the line from my ethical lines. I didn't want to get into the world of pornography and OnlyFans, though it is, I think that a lot of companies are embracing that. All of my models are safe for work, I guess you could say. But I have skewed some of them more provocative in bathing suits and stuff like that. Some of them have hundreds of thousands of followers. And because I started so early, people now will go, oh, well, those are probably AI. It only has like 6 photos in their feed and it was created last month. Well, these have years of, library and posts in their feed. So it's like, it's questionable. And because we don't cross that line and communicate in a way that is imperfect and not like, just canned chatter and stuff like that. Yeah, we are crossing a very weird threshold at this point in time, and I think people need to have more conversations about it.
Yeah. I mean, the wave is coming, and you can decide if you're going to jump or dive down into the water.
Yeah, you can be the old person saying, "Well, I'm not going to have a cell phone because these landlines. You just come down here and talk to me." Like, no, like printing off MapQuest directions and having a Thomas guide is not the most efficient way when you have Apple Maps or Google Maps.
It kind of feels like quitting too. Like, we're worried about all of these, all of the state and corporate infrastructure and blah blah blah, and all of these, I guess to some degree, external from our lives pressures that, when combined with the tech, make it problematic.
Yes.
Right? But the tech itself isn't. So to me, it feels kind of illusory just to become a Luddite. Why don't we go fuck these people up, right?
Well, that's why I say building open, like, so, regulation's not necessarily the answer, but what if, like, to your point about the competitive marketplace, instead of saying, hey, look, we know cigarette smoking is bad. Okay, we're not going to restrict your ability to do it, to sell it, but you are going to have to spend X amount of money in, I don't know, re-education, addiction.
Oh, that's already happening. But Truth is a program, like, so it was part of the Philip Morris and all the what's the other one? R.J. Reynolds.
Yeah.
Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds lost that big lawsuit for giving everybody cancer, basically.
Yeah.
And part of it was they had to start the Truth campaign. They fund that whole thing.
Oh, interesting.
All the anti-smoking stuff, all is from the people that sell you
restrictions and
cigarettes.
Advertising and stuff like that. So when you start looking at the net negative benefit or the consequences of like social media, the attention economy and stuff like that, it's like, yeah, but these platforms are, like, as much as they want to say that they're not really the public square or whatever, they want to hide behind Section 230 whenever it's convenient. It's like, well, no, what are the open source options? The problem with open source or decentralized options is, by its definition, nobody controls it. And for governments or organizations that want to make a profit, want to extract value, want to put their thumb on the scale, that's a problem.
Sure, yeah.
But I think that's what's necessary for us to get through these things, is to say, hey, look, here's the unfiltered, decentralized, permissionless, whatever, free speech platform. And if you want to build on top of it, you can. And by building on top of it, you could build something that has filters, that has algorithmic weights towards different things, that censors certain things, and that's fine.
Yeah, even if it was one product that had an a la carte option for that stuff, which I think Elon's looking into that on Twitter.
Yeah.
I think maybe the code is just too dense at this point to pull off something like that, frankly, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, it's certainly possible. The issue I have with censorship and regulation is, then how do you prevent some, like, you create an infrastructure for recourse, whether it's for companies or individuals. How do you prevent people from using it in an unethical way? Because that happens all the time. Patent trolls are the best example for me, because we get sued all the time for everything.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we started a company called something AF 90 years ago. I'm like, where's your product? You don't have one? Well, we get the trademark and a fucking product that makes millions of dollars. Shut the fuck up, dude.
Yeah.
But still, it's going to cost me $25,000 to get rid of this asshole every single time. No matter what happens. And there's nothing you can do about it, right? Somebody can. We have a justice system with a legal recourse for anybody that gets oppressed or offended or injured by somebody else. But it is an imperfect system, right? You can accuse somebody of rape, and that stink stays on them for the rest of their life, whether they were involved in anything nefarious or not, right?
Yeah.
And there's very little, if any, recourse for you at that point.
Yeah.
So I'm always, now that we're starting to look to tear down certain systems and build new ones, I really do think it's important that we go through some of these paces and take our time a little bit. I know we're rapidly getting to a certain point, but these conversations need to happen about how we're going to keep this from being an exploitable situation for people that are assholes.
And that's where I'll again, this is a talking point I use probably way too much, but like where I joke that I'm a libertarian short of anarchy is that like I think you have to err on the right of the individual, because we're again iterating changing so fast that if you're not protecting the individual, it's going to be really, really easy. You take government as an example. You take any of the, you talk about like the big contractors, right? Getting no big contracts.
Yeah.
So they're taking your taxpayer money, and then if you vote for somebody else or whatever, they're gonna take and they're gonna use your money to lobby against you to make sure that you're gonna get somebody in office that is gonna keep paying them. Or you look at it another way, another 3-letter organization takes and wants to litigate something based off of you not having the proper paperwork on your suppressor or whatever that thing is, the definition of the pistol brace, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And they'll be able to litigate you with your money and have an endless supply of taking you to court. Yeah. And even if you're in the right. So it's like, again,
well, that's something people don't know about civil forfeiture, especially, right? The government, for any kind of civil forfeiture to include firearms, can take you to court. And in other ways, if they take you to court for something criminal, for example, and they fail, then they're going to have to pay for all that, right?
Yeah.
If they take you to civil court, they don't have to pay for shit.
Yeah.
If it's a civil forfeiture, the federal government and state governments as well, like New York has this rule. I was just talking to Rich High about it a couple months ago. The red flag laws, as they draw them up, is a civil forfeiture. It's not a criminal action, which means that you have to pay for your own representation and you never recover that money.
That's crazy.
Tens of thousands of dollars to fight the federal government for your right.
So yeah, I think that there should be caps on and audits on spending and like, hey, look, this is your budget within that, and there's accountability is actually another one of the components to the recovery process and everything. And I think we've, as a society, in so many aspects, have lost the accountability, personal accountability to, political accountability. I mean, there are so many ways of which, the fusion of responsibility has just kind of screwed the pooch in that.
Sure, yeah.
So,
well, every time you decide to leave one of the critical tasks of keeping yourself alive to somebody else, you forfeit some of your right.
Yeah.
That's true whether it's the government or your community, right? And we make these deals.
Yeah.
We're comfortable making these deals, and we should be, because we're communicative. We're communicative animals. We are on this planet to serve each other, it doesn't matter how you feel about that philosophically or ethically or morally or any of that shit. That's just a biological fact, right?
Yeah.
And you're going to be better served to behave that way. But there is a limit, right?
Yeah.
Like the diffusion of power is a good thing in broader terms. When it comes to the individual, though, typically when there's a critical mass of diffusion of power, somebody will step into that gap and collect it all, right? And that typically is the state. And when the state is large, the individual is small, right?
Yeah.
And it kills everything. There's no more all the things that you get from the individual effort. This is the thing that made America great in the first place. All the things you get from the individual effort just kind of go away.
Yeah. Yeah, the problem, I think, with a lot of that is, you see this a lot as an employer. You probably see it a lot in the workplace. But there are a lot of people right now who understand there's a problem, and some people are able to accurately assess and diagnose the reasons for things. And again, for anybody who would be listening who's ever ran a business, everybody knows that there's a problem. We'll talk about it. Very few people offer up constructive solutions, and I think that's where we have to get people. Hey, look, don't just be a dick and just say, hey, there's a problem. You're wrong. Okay. Offer up some constructive paths to move forward. I think that's one reason why I was kind of compelled to start going through this process myself. Things that, I think you have to start. Kind of like like Fight Club, or whatever. You're like, you have to help yourself before you can help others and everything. It's the oxygen on the airplane. Put your mask on before helping others and everything. So for me, it's like, okay, how can I make myself a more resilient, helpful, caring, compassionate, contributing to society kind of person? And I think it starts with yourself. Once you're able to do that, then, work on your family, work on your friends, your community, and then we can start. And I think if everyone just did that, the government, the nation, global things would kind of fall into place.
Yeah.
But because everyone's so focused top heavy, we're really, really sacrificing the individual's responsibility in this. And I think that more people should step up to the plate, offer constructive feedback and criticism, and a path to move forward.
Yeah. Well, that's a good place to end it. Take some fucking responsibility. It requires that, right? It's society is a fragile thing, and it always has been. When people divest, and you can see this in the inverse too, when people divest from it, it tends to go poorly. And then when usually it's some leader or another, or some movement or another, that kind of unifies people. Again, Constantine in the 4th century Christianity, Muhammad in the 8th and the 7th and 8th centuries with Islam. It's like Muhammad, or Allah was one of thousands of Arab pagan gods, right? And he just picked one. He's like, this is our God now. Everybody get in line or we'll fuck you up, right? Yeah. All right, that's kind of brutal, but effective. You know what I mean? So now we have global communication. It's going to be difficult to rally people around something like that from a leader, but I think ideologically we can figure it out, right? Like, we're not talking about.
We have to.
If we talk about aliens right now, we're going to be on here for another 2 hours. But like some kind of existential threat usually is the precursor for that. I don't know what it is now, but we'll figure it out.
Cordyceps.
Just fucking mushrooms growing out through the toilet or something. Tell everybody where they can find you.
Well, I am on social medias.
Occasionally.
Don't use them as much as I probably should. I use it to post my usage.
I think the last time I saw you on Twitter was like July 4th or something like that.
Yeah. So I mean, Richard Ryan. I'll come back on here start of next year once I get the book done, and then I'll have a website with all this stuff out, and we'll just go from there.
Sweet. Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.